You, of course, I think argued in a recent piece, I think in the FT, if I'm not wrong, that I read, where you said you were surprised that countries didn't band together. Countries didn't come together because together they might have had much greater leverage on over the US and President Trump and the Trump administration. Instead, countries have ended up taking, as you were saying just now, these personalistic deals, like let me try and get the best deal and I'm not really going to worry about anyone else. Whereas, game theory, etc., would suggest that there's maybe a different strategy that you could have adopted that could have been more optimal for everyone else. Why do you think that didn't happen?
Well, game theory says two things. One is there was a different strategy that would have been better. But the second is that there's also a very strong incentive for any individual country to defect from that strategy. To me, the most telling was Canada and Mexico. They were two of the first countries targeted by Trump. At first, you thought they were going to stand up together against the United States. And then Mexico went a different way than Canada. Mexico got initially what looked like it was going to be a better deal than Canada was getting. I thought to myself, wow, if Canada and Mexico, which are part of this three-part trade agreement with the United States, can't stay together, how are other countries around the world going to? And so the United States never did an attempt at a multilateral negotiation. There were all these rumors about a Mar-a-Lago Accord, bring all the countries of the world to Mar-a-Lago, redo global exchange rates, make it like the Plaza Accord around exchange rates was in 1985. The United States never attempted that. It treated this entirely as bespoke, and every country has played into that bespoke approach. And the result is the United States, in some sense, has prevailed over lots and lots of countries around the world. But that prevailing is a real Pyrrhic victory, because prevailing is defined as the U.S. having very high tariffs. And the one country we know is definitely hurt by all of this is the United States.
And do you think that the US, if you would just stick with that game theory perspective for a second, how did the US manage to, let's say, break Mexico away in that situation where if Mexico and Canada had stayed together, they would have both benefited? How is it that the US managed to get Mexico to break out of that?
I don't know if the US did or if Mexico and President Sheinbaum just understood that her interests and her country's interests were better served by separating from Canada. When this initial separation happened, Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada. President Trump had some real issues with Justin Trudeau, and she probably pretty quickly grasped that joining together with him would put her in a worse position than trying to cut a separate deal. That's another one, by the way, I wouldn't have predicted. I thought that woman president of Mexico would not be the type of person that Donald Trump would care very much about, would develop a strong relationship, would have camaraderie. He's had a lot of complaints about Mexico over the years. And so I thought Mexico would be in for something much worse. Ended up getting, but it turns out, there's different ways to handle Donald Trump. And it's pretty hard to predict ex ante who's going to crack that code and who's not going to.
Other than countries trying to move some parts of their manufacturing to the US, etc., as you were saying, and then the personalistic approach that you've also recommended, do you expect that the movement of production facilities away, let's say from, if I was China, moving into Vietnam or moving into Mexico, this kind of strategy will get adopted more and more? One. And second, do you expect that trade patterns themselves will become more regional, or Asia will start trading a lot more with itself, so trading partners will change? What's your sense on those two likely pieces coming out of these churnings?
Yeah, we've already been seeing this. Since 2018, bilateral trade between the United States and China has fallen, but trade between the United States and a set of countries that the IMF has called connector countries, say Indonesia, Vietnam, has grown. And that is basically a rerouting of where things are coming from. That reflects just how strong the economic benefits of globalization are, that it will find, some which way to get globalized. When you talk about connections between the rest of the world, I'm not sure. A couple months ago, that's what I thought would happen. But I also thought more countries would work together to stand up to the United States, and that hasn't happened either. A basic principle of the global trading system since the establishment of the GATT after World War II, then turned into the World Trade Organization, is something called Most Favoured Nation, which is if you have a tariff rate on one country, you have to have that tariff rate on every other country. Everyone is now breaking most favored nation with the United States. They're having different tariff rates with the United States than they have with other countries. Once you've broken most favored nation with the United States, is Europe going to end up with different tariff rates with, Latin America and Asia and, Africa? Maybe it will. And then you could end up having a world where rather than this trading system that frankly was reasonably complicated, but at least had some limit to its complexity with this MFN principle, that gets blown up and it is every country for itself